Hello, I'm John and I'm a law student at Montfort University.
Hi, I'm Wiz and I work for an organisation called Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum in the International Office in London.
Wiz, you organised the meeting today for Zimbabwean refugees. Could you tell us a bit about the organisation that you work for?
Yeah, it's called the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum. It's an organisation with its offices in Zimbabwe. It's the major human rights organisation in Zimbabwe, and it comprises 19 of Zimbabwe's most well-known and fantastic human rights organisations, things like Doctors for Human Rights, Lawyers for Human Rights, and many other organisations that look at different themes of human rights. So there's media rights and so on and so forth.
So
we have a small London office where we do advocacy on the Zimbabwean situation at an international level, at the UN and so forth. Our head office in Zimbabwe works to research and document the organised violence and torture, which is the main mission of this organisation, to look at that and document it, and to work for a Zimbabwe in which there is no organised violence and torture. But more recently, we have a transitional justice program, which is why we're here today.
And in your role, do you put a lot of pressure on local or national governments? Do you work with international organisations? I mean,
yes,
it's clearly a very big forum. Like you've mentioned, it's international, so it must help a lot of people.
Yes, the Zimbabwean crisis has both a domestic, regional and an international dimension. Domestically, the forum is working inside Zimbabwe to bring justice for victims of torture by taking their cases, torture victims' cases, to court to try and win some compensation, and by documenting the situation carefully, documenting the violence, the cases of violence and so on, so that perhaps we can have some justice in the future. But as I said, in London, we have a small team that works internationally. So we do attend, for instance, the UN Human Rights Council, where we try to keep Zimbabwe on the agenda. We do attend African Union meetings, SADC meetings in the region of Africa, EU, that's another organisation, a body that we try to work with, all in an attempt to bring attention, world attention, to what's going on in Zimbabwe, to put pressure on the government of Zimbabwe to adhere to what's called international norms and standards of human rights. So, for instance, the main thing that we work on is to try and pressurize the government of Zimbabwe to outlaw torture in Zimbabwe, to sign and ratify the Convention Against Torture, and then to give meaning to that, really, in Zimbabwe, to make sure that all these cases of violence and torture stop and cease.
It all sounds very effective, and obviously the rule of law is something that is lacking in Zimbabwe. It's brilliant that victims are able to get justice through the courts. How many successful cases do you have, and do they take a long time to manage? What's the mechanism?
I don't have the on the tips of my fingertips the number of cases that are brought to the courts. Actually, it's fairly few. It's more the tip of the iceberg. Even the research and documentation that we've done, and people do say that the Zimbabwean crisis is the best documented crisis in the world. Even that does not capture fully the whole scale, the mass scale of the atrocities that have taken place in Zimbabwe. So it's really the tip of the iceberg, the big cases. You know, we've taken big cases to, if the courts in Zimbabwe are prejudiced and they're not independent, which unfortunately is often the case, we've taken a lot of cases to the African Commission to try and find a solution regionally. Where that doesn't work again, you know, we're looking at international cases.
Exactly,
as well.
and you've stepped in and got the ball rolling so people can get the justice that they need. And even though it's the tip of the iceberg, hopefully it will continue and the cases will build up.
Yeah.
And as international norms become recognised, and obviously the voice that you have on the international organisations coupled with those cases is clearly very effective.
It just builds a mass pressure, you know. So yes, it's just something that we continue to work on, and I'm sure we will be working on it probably for the rest of my life. Um, the reason perhaps why we're doing transitional justice now, what we're actually doing here in Leicester is that we're consulting with Zimbabweans about what kind of options for transitional justice they would want. We've talked about accountability, reparations, institutional reform, and these kind of things, and we're asking Zimbabweans all around the UK, and indeed in Zimbabwe too, a parallel process has been going on, as to what they would want to see to bring an end to the human rights abuses. What kind of justice do Zimbabweans